So the first big message I want to get across to all of you is, if you want to do politics or policy, the things you've been studying as an undergraduate, there's no better place to do it than to actually work for the government, right? I think there's a misapprehension that being a lawyer is the way to do politics or policy. Being a lawyer generally means doing business, generally means writing contracts or dealing with disputes, or maybe dealing as a practitioner in the criminal law. It certainly doesn't mean rewriting the criminal law, which is what congressional staffers do. So what I want to do is introduce you to jobs where you can actually change things, if that's your interest, and make government work for people, which I think should be all of our interest. So why look at federal jobs? So first of all, this is the way you can actually put your knowledge to work. So if you're really interested in doing policy, executive departments are where you should be looking. This is where you implement programs, where you really make things happen. If you're interested in being politically active, of course, Congress is also where laws get written. And they're really a great way to gain experience and have real responsibility early in your career. I think you'll find that working in the government, you often get to do a lot more than you would as in the private sector, for example, at an early age. And you're doing public service, something I think a lot of you have been really interested in. And then the last thing one of the reasons why I suggested doing this right now is because I think this is a moment where there are huge opportunities in the federal government, because a lot of departments have become understaffed over the last 4 years. There's been a lot of attrition. There was a lot of departments that were demoralized during the Trump administration. And so there's a lot of interest in rehiring. And there's going to be stimulus money, it seems like, which is going to lead to even more rehiring. But the federal government has not been as badly hit budget-wise as state and local governments are. So regardless of how the stimulus affects individual departments, I think you're going to see a lot of hiring among individual departments. So this is the moment to start getting your resume ready, looking at USA Jobs, figuring out how to manage that website, and really thinking about how to join the federal government. So I do want to note state and local jobs. Usually I really push these on students because the departments are similar. If you're interested in environmental protection, you're interested in labor, you're interested in commerce, all the same kind of departments exist at the state level. You often get way more hands-on experience way earlier in your career at a state and local level. And I think especially for states where the capital is not the hot big city, it's an incredible way to get a great job at a very early age. And all of the states around us, think Harrisburg, Trenton, Albany, Dover, these are not exactly the hottest tickets in town, which means that it's a great way to get a good job. Right now, it's a bit of a problem because all of these states are broke because of COVID. So it's more, think if the stimulus goes through or if the economy starts to pick up, I think there's going to be a lot more available at the state and local level that you should also think about. The people I know who've been able to, rise really fast in government, a lot of them actually did start at state government. And, there's some interesting departments. For example, if you're an international relations type, most state governments have an economic development department that's all about outreach, looking for investment from other countries. Those offices are really tiny, and you kind of fly around the world and get people to meet with people and try to create investment. They can be very exciting jobs. And actually a friend of mine who did that in Delaware moved from there straight into a deputy assistant secretary job in Washington, which could take an entire career in the federal civil service to get there if one does. So there's a lot of opportunity. Not a lot of money right now. Look again, maybe in a year. Also, we're going to talk about congressional jobs. Every state has a state legislature, similar jobs working for state legislatures. So think about all levels of government, a lot of opportunity everywhere. Back to the federal. So executive departments. So executive departments are all of the cabinet offices that you've heard of, right? This is HHS, Department of Energy, EPA, you know, education, all of these offices, plus of course, all the agencies, you know, so James works at the IRS, but whether it's the Drug Enforcement Agency, the FDA, CDC, all of these are under the executive. The executive, and almost all of their jobs are offered through USA Jobs. So James is going to talk more about that, but that's where you're going to find a ton of those jobs. Not all of them though. So the Foreign Service is separate. It's a separate service. There's in the State Department, we have both Foreign Service and Civil Service. So the Civil Service jobs are offered on USA Jobs. The Foreign Service jobs, which include the State Department plus the Foreign Commercial Service under the Department of Commerce. Those jobs go through the Foreign Service exam and the Foreign Service, and I'm happy to talk even more about that, but I think there's going to be tons of hiring in the Foreign Service. So there's no particular requirement for graduate degrees to get in, although the majority of people do have them. But you would look for that on the State Department. Office, the other thing to realize, like a lot of you may be doing some international relations, every department within the federal government has an international affairs office. So when I worked as a Foreign Service officer at state, a lot of my work was with people who were, for example, in the international affairs office at the EPA, or in the similar office, which was called Global Health, at the Department of Health and Human Services, and also at the NIH. Some of those people had specialized training in environment or health, but a lot of them didn't. A lot of them were just general international relations types. And within the federal government, nobody has a strict delineation between people who've studied international affairs and people who've studied comparative politics. So don't worry about that. If all of your classes have been in comparative politics, that's great too. In fact, most of what we do, I would say, is more similar to comparative politics than international relations, which tends to think more about systems than individual countries. So other offices that I think might hire a lot of recent grads are legislative affairs, anything with communications. Remember, a lot of people who are the age of your parents may not feel as comfortable with like web-based communications as younger people. So showing some web skills, knowing a little HTML, all those kind of things can be super useful for getting a job when you're relatively young. But there are jobs all over the place. And so it's just a question of looking and really keeping an eye on it, which I think James will also talk about. You have to be, if you want to look for a federal job and you're starting on USA Jobs, you should be checking it, if not almost every day, certainly every week, because jobs come and jobs go. Marcus, can we mute you? Okay. So when you're getting a job, USA Jobs does mark whether jobs are available to recent grads. But the other thing you should realize about federal jobs is that a large number of them have specific preferences for people with specific experience. And so it's worth thinking about sort of an entry strategy. So people with military service get preferences for federal jobs. There are a lot of people in America with military service. So if you're a ROTC person, great, you're going to have that. You can use that. If you're not, and that's not your interest, there are several other routes that you can use to get that experience. One is to look for the various internship programs. There are a lot of internship programs within the federal government, some of them for college students, and recent college grads, a whole bunch of them for people in grad programs. So if you're thinking about going for a master's, you can start thinking about things like the Presidential Management Fellow, which is for people in graduate programs, but there are lots of them. There are also internship programs at the House and the Senate as well. So that's one really good entry into the federal government. And while your uncle isn't going to be particularly helpful in getting you a job, as Professor Kreutzer said, the person in the next cubicle when you're an intern is very likely to be helpful at getting you the next job. So getting in the door is really important. Two other ways to actually get the same exact preference as veterans, and that's to join either Peace Corps or AmeriCorps. And I strongly recommend that you think about those as a route into federal service. Now, I think a lot of people know about Peace Corps. I went on the website today because I was kind of wondering how things are going with COVID. I don't think they're back to recruiting at the same levels as they were pre-COVID, but they are recruiting now. There are actually Peace Corps jobs listed. So I would look at Peace Corps very seriously. If you're interested in Peace Corps, certainly if you're in your senior year, now is not too late to be working on it. Now's not too late if you're a junior, because it takes quite a while to go through the full application process. If you're interested in an international career, Peace Corps is one of the absolute best ways to enter into an international career of any kind, especially a development career. Peace Corps generally gives folks language training. So you'll learn a language, which is really great, really helpful. Peace Corps also counts as 2 years of development work. So USAID and most agencies that do development, all of the NGOs and private contractors that USAID and similar groups work with, they generally require 2 years of development experience before they'll hire you. Peace Corps is 2 years of development experience. So it's a way to, whether you want to work in the federal government long-term or in development, Peace Corps is a fantastic route in, and I strongly recommend it. And then it does give you that government hiring preference, so that when you come back, you can look for another job within the federal government. And I know in a lot of the technical areas, a lot of the people they hire are ex-Peace Corps volunteers. AmeriCorps is within the US. So it's similar to Peace Corps. That was the whole idea. It was founded originally as VISTA. It's now sometimes called AmeriCorps VISTA. And it's all kinds of service within the US. Also, Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, they pay. They don't pay well, but they will keep you fed and housed. So a lot of internships out there, especially in the private sector, really privilege people of privilege. And these are jobs that don't, because they actually do pay for people to actually be able to live in the place where they're assigned. So I think that's a really important consideration as well. So let's not forget about Congress, right? Our elected representatives. If you're interested in politics, there's no better way to do that than to work for an individual member. So the way congressional staff works is that each individual member of Congress, whether a senator or a congressperson, has their own staff in their own offices. These are all the poor people who were hiding under the desks in various offices on January 6th, right? They tend to have a bunch of staff. Some of them, and of course they also have staff in their district offices as well. A whole bunch of that staff deal with constituents' problems. First of all, it's a great way to learn politics because it's retail politics at its best, dealing with your actual voters. Secondly, you'll learn an enormous amount about the way government works, because most of the problems that you're dealing with are people not getting their Social Security checks, or worrying about their grandmother's Medicaid, or not getting their kid into the right school, or not getting a visa for their uncle. And you'll sort of discover how every department of the federal government works, right? Or a small business in your town not getting a contract with the Veterans Administration, right? So it's everything you can imagine, and that's what a lot of congressional staffers do. They also have legislative aides, they have press aides. It's a full career leading up to chiefs of staff of individual members. There's also committee staff. And so in the legislative aides, will be working on legislation, stuff like that. So there's the policy side as well. Then there's committee staff, which are very much working on the policy side, right? They're running the hearings, they're writing legislation, they're doing the research to figure out what that legislation should say, et cetera, et cetera. In general, people work up to getting on a committee staff, that they start with individual members and then work toward getting on a committee. Those are often the more prestigious positions. Congress also has agencies of its own, like the Congressional Research Service, which does a ton of research. They produce research reports. The General Accounting Office, which also does research, but it's not accounting, it's more like auditing. And CRS generally does more broad, like they look at a topic. GAO does stuff at the request of individual members, but they both are generating research for use by Congress in better understanding what's going on in the government or in problems. When I was a Foreign Service officer, I actually dealt with GAO from time to time because an individual member would ask them to research how the Chinese handled the SARS crisis in 2003, for example. And so we had a whole GAO team come out to Beijing and set them up to do a bunch of interviews and do some research. So those jobs, most of them are actually on USA Jobs. They're also separate commissions. It seems like CRS may have its own set of job listings, because I did do a little bit of research on this. GAO doesn't. They're all listed on USA Jobs. And then there are all these commissions. I work on China. There are 2 separate commissions that work on China. And over the years, I've seen lots and lots of recent Chinese studies graduates go and work for one of these 2 commissions. They produce research reports, run hearings. I've testified at several of them. And so those are all ways to sort of see how the government works, be sort of halfway between Congress and the executive. You could think about using those as a stepping stone either into another congressional job or into an executive job. Congress offers internships. House and Senate offices all have internships, so you can look for those as well. One important piece of advice in terms of Congress is you have to pick your party, and you pick your party at the beginning, and you're unlikely to be able to ever switch. And that was true even 30, 40 years ago when the world was not as polarized as it is now. So if your local congressperson is from one party and you are interested in the other party, don't think, oh, because I can use my local connections to get this job, I should do it. And local connections do help a lot for congressional staff jobs, because once you do that, you're never going to be able to get a job with the party that you want to get with. So that's a really important consideration. Make sure you know what you believe, and then you choose to work for that party. Things like Congressional Research Service, GAO, these commissions, they're all nonpartisan. You can apply for them regardless of your party. But if you're going to work for a staff, like the committees have majority and minority staff, and the members, of course, are of different parties. An obvious thing, volunteering on a campaign, especially for someone that's running for the first time, is a really good way to work your way into a staff job, right? Getting to know folks. And as I said, local connections do help a lot with getting congressional staff jobs. So if your local senator or representative is of your preferred party, really worth seeing who you know in town, who knows them, et cetera, because that really does help with Congress. Congress has exempted itself from almost all employment laws. So everything about merit and fairness and discriminating, very little of it applies to Congress. So all of the backdoor stuff, yeah, it doesn't matter which party, they all do it. Okay, so that's Congress. When you're thinking about applying, and this is, really where I think advice for everyone, sophomores, juniors, seniors, think about your skills, right? What skills do you have? One of the skills I think Villanova students tend to have in spades is writing. You guys are good writers. So make sure, you showcase that by writing a good cover letter and not having any typos or errors in your resumes. But also you can put that down as a skill. Foreign languages, inventory what ones you have. In general, for federal jobs, even for like State Department or the intelligence agencies, they care about speaking and reading. They don't care how well you write in a foreign language, because you're basically analyzing what other people say and then writing it in English for an American audience of your government. Other types of skills, web design, communication. I know so many people whose first job in Washington was doing the website for some organization or another. So those are skills you can acquire on your own. They're worth acquiring. Statistics. We had another wonderful alumni 2 years ago, I guess, speaking, and he said that he felt he couldn't apply to half the jobs in Washington because he didn't have stats. So let me put that in two different ways. One is that's a really good reason to learn stats. The other thing is the level of stats that most jobs in Washington require is not actually that high. So it's worth learning a little stats and then putting it on your resume that you know stats. I teach some Stata in my 1900 class. I know Professor Burge does as well. The textbook we use is easy to self-teach. And honestly, if you're up for a job and they say they need stats, just say, yes, I can do it, because you can teach yourself in 2 weeks. It's just not that hard. What basically they want in Washington is a bunch of nice graphs. No, the number of offices that are, unless you're applying for a job at the Federal Reserve, the chances that you would be running a regression are approaching zero. Few jobs, Bureau of Labor Statistics, there's some stats people over at the Department of Agriculture, but not a whole lot. So if, some commerce entry level job wants stats, chances are you're going to be producing some graphs. Briefing, presentation skills, I think they're important, and make sure you have them. And then the one I think students often miss is that you often have management skills and don't credit yourself with them. If you've been managing a whole shift at a coffee place, if you've been managing all the lifeguards all summer at the pool, you're a manager. I had one student who was managing 50 lifeguards. A lot of people in the federal government have never managed 50 people. That's pretty impressive. So make sure that you give yourself credit for all the management skills that you do have. Think that through. Ultimately, if you're interested in a Washington job, you are going to need a master's to move up. There's a lot of jobs that need at least a master's. So a master's or that includes an MBA. A law degree is fine, but entirely unnecessary. So I think it's worth doing an internship or an entry-level position, looking around, figuring out exactly what you want. But if you want to continue in a Washington job, I think you will find you'll want to get a master's. But it's really important to take the time to do a job or two and figure out what you want a master's in, right? If your interest is in environment or public health or business development or something, you may choose to get different kinds of masters. And I think that is one of the advantages of spending some time actually doing a job before you go to grad school, to make that choice. Or of course, the other nice choice is to do the Villanova BA/MA, and you come out of college with a master's in 5 years, which I think is a pretty nice option as well. There are a lot of jobs that you'll see that just require a master's to even apply for them. So that's worth thinking about. But almost no job in Washington requires more than a master's. And whole departments that I think you're interested in, I mean, the State Department has 11 lawyers. Everybody else is in a job that doesn't require a lawyer, right? So you think, I have written so many treaties myself. I'm not a lawyer, and most of them, I don't even know whether any lawyer, or international agreements, I don't know whether any lawyer ever even looked at them. So I think that's an important thing that people often miss, and why it's worth actually going and working in government and seeing what you like. I do want to also mention think tanks and advocacy organizations, because that's another successful route to a Washington career. There's a lot of movement between these organizations and executive departments. They don't have one website like USA Jobs. You do need to go to all these different websites to look for them. So typically when you get on any website, like I used to work for the World Resources Institute, if you look at the top, there's a bunch of tabs, and one of them will say jobs or careers or internships or something on the website. Click on that and you'll find a listing and how to apply. Really worth doing if you're interested in government. And again, you're going to want to think about how to be positioned. An awful lot of these think tanks and advocacy organizations in Washington do tilt either right or left, right? So if you're a Republican, you might want to go work for the American Enterprise Institute or the Heritage Foundation or the Cato Institute. If you're a Democrat, you might want to work for Brookings. You might want to work for the Natural Resources Defense Council. You might want to, you might want to work for Greenpeace. There are a million different groups. Just make sure you're choosing to apply, or Center for American Progress, which has become the think tank of the Democratic Party, basically. So you want to make sure you're choosing one that's aligned with your views, and that will also help open the door to other jobs that are aligned with your views. People do move from these types of groups that do have a political valence into federal civil service jobs that don't. So that isn't too much of a problem. If you work for World Resources Institute, I think, when it was founded in the 80s, it was very much nonpartisan, and officially it is, but in the 80s, Republicans asked for its advice. That hasn't been true for a while. So most of the advice it gives is going to be to Democrats, but plenty of people move from there into the EPA, for example. There are some centrist organizations, mostly on foreign policy, right? So Quincy Institute, Center for Strategic and International Studies, Atlantic Council, they try to play straight down the middle, but most organizations in Washington have political loyalty on one side or the other. And then there are also a lot of business organizations. So if you're interested in business development and advocacy for business interests, there's a ton of groups, and that includes, professional organizations. Everybody from the Chamber of Commerce to the American Psychiatric Association has an office in Washington. I have one friend's daughter who now works for a labor think tank. She started out working for the advocacy organization of whatever the Reform Jewish organization is called, and she's not Jewish either, but they basically advocate for every liberal point of view on every subject, as far as I can tell, and she was their webmaster. Again, having some web skills, they're always looking for some younger person to do that, because whoever runs the organization probably has no clue how to do that. So think about that as a skill you can pick up that will make some boss somewhere really happy. So, but there are all these different kind of groups. There are tons of them. You have to go website by website, but it's a great way to get experience. And I mean, as I say, she worked for this Reform Jewish organization, and from there really got into Democratic Party policy making. So there are a lot of roots in, and it's worth taking a look. I have 2 pages here of resources, and I'll copy these and put these in the chat while James is speaking. Just some links so these are basically a bunch of the job sites. This is a nice website I found that gave instructions. This part of the USA Jobs is just on internships, which I thought would be helpful to everyone. You can apply to Peace Corps, you can apply to AmeriCorps, State Department. Again, there's Foreign Service, there's Civil Service. If you want to go abroad, your Foreign Service. If you want to work in Washington, your Civil Service. The House and the Senate, etc. There's a whole report. So this is what the Congressional Research Service does. It produces reports, and they produced a report on congressional internships. They also produce reports on the Chinese economy, on drug sales in Latin America, everything. And one big difference is the Senate does seem to list its internships up on its website, whereas the House webpage said just go contact the individual members. So they're quite different in that regard. And finally, I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. Send me an email and we can either set up to meet during office hours or whenever is convenient to you.